In Hartford, Connecticut today. It happened. It was a long time coming. In the most important way, it was too late. But it did finally happen today.
This is a profoundly emotional day, I think, for everyone in this room and everyone watching what is transpiring today in the state of Connecticut. We have come together in a way that relatively few places in our nation have demonstrated an ability to do. In some senses, I hope that this is an example to the rest of the nation, certainly to our leaders in Washington who seem so deeply divided about an issue such as universal background checks, where the country is not divided itself. When 92% of Americans agree that every gun sale should be subject to a background check, there is no excuse for representatives or senators who don't come to the assistance of those that they are elected to represent.
Connecticut Governor Dan Malloy this afternoon signing into law gun reforms for the state of Connecticut. Restrictions on extended capacity magazines and assault weapons, tougher restrictions on criminals and the mentally ill having access to guns, background checks for all gun purchases, background checks for buying bullets. Governor Malloy, as you can see here, is in green, the green tie and the green ribbon on his lapel there. That's because green was the school spirit color for Sandy Hook Elementary School. Sandy Hook, which saw 20 of its first graders slaughtered on December 14th using weaponry that was purchased legally before that massacre, but that will not be legal for sale in Connecticut once today's new law goes into effect. Among the people who were looking over the governor's shoulder today and receiving the pens with which he signed the new law were parents of 6- and 7-year-olds who were killed at Sandy Hook.
This is a path I never thought my life would take, but working to save the lives of others is one of the ways that I am honoring Dylan's life. Sandy Hook Promise has given many of us a way to convey our views to our state's leaders with love and logic, and you have received us with love and respect, without partisanship. More important, you have listened. My son, Jake, every child in Connecticut will be safer because of that.
That is Nicole Hockley, whose son Dylan was killed at Sandy Hook on December 14th. Another one of the 6-year-olds killed that day would have turned 7 years old today. Her name was Anna Marquez Green, and today was her 7th birthday. It would have been. On her birthday today, her parents wrote an op-ed in USA Today about their soulful, cheerful daughter who loved to sing and about the need for gun reform. There was a moment of silence today for Anna Marquez Green in the busiest place on earth, right in the middle of Times Square. The state assemblywoman who represents Newtown, Connecticut in the state legislature did not go to the bill signing today for this reform legislation that she supported, in part so she could take part in this, in marking Anna Marquez Green's birthday today. But this did get done today. And Connecticut Democrats did not do this on their own, even though numerically they could have done it on their own, since Democrats dominate both houses of the legislature and they have the governorship in Dan Malloy. Democrats in Connecticut could have done this alone, but they chose instead to work with the minority Republicans to come up with something that could get bipartisan support, even though it didn't have to happen that way. But it did get bipartisan support. It got overwhelming votes in both the House and the Senate in Connecticut, with Republicans and Democrats both voting for it, not unanimously, but substantially in both houses. And today it is not just Connecticut, it is also Maryland. Maryland, where Democratic Governor Martin O'Malley's package of gun reforms originally passed the Senate back in February and then passed the House yesterday. The vote was 78-61. The package had to bounce back to the Senate today to iron out the differences between the two versions, but it passed there again tonight, 28-19. And this package of gun reforms in Maryland is on its way to Governor O'Malley's desk right now, and we know that he will sign it. Now, interestingly, in Maryland, there's a really low threshold for what it takes to submit a new law to the voters, to give voters in a ballot measure a chance to thumbs up or thumbs down a new law. Because of that, almost everybody thinks that once Governor O'Malley signs the bill in Maryland, it will actually be put on hold for more than a year, so it can be voted on in the general election next November. Now, in terms of that referendum in the state, all the policy in this bill is very popular. Background checks, assault weapons ban, a limit on high-capacity magazines, blocking mentally ill people from access to weapons. These are the kinds of measures that tend to poll very well among the general public, no matter how loud the threatening uproar is from the minority who disagree, who don't want any gun laws at all. So we will have to see if the Maryland reforms stand up in referendum when they inevitably get there next November. But the reform package passed today that will end up on the ballot, that package does consist of popular stuff. This is the democratic process playing out on this issue. Right? The legislature makes a decision, the governor makes a decision, and in Maryland at least, the people can then try for a citizen's veto if they want to try for that. That is the democratic process. But one Maryland legislator has decided instead to try to go a different route. The Maryland Gazette reporting today that while the Maryland House was debating the gun bill, a Republican state legislator named Don Dwyer was on his Facebook page calling for Maryland to form a militia. Quote, "Dear Maryland patriots, I was certain that the time would come when there would be a need to organize the voluntary militia. That time has come." Then an hour later, Representative Dwyer posted another update to his Facebook page. Quote, "Do not post on Facebook your response to my call for the militia." There's a typo there. He wrote fizz. I think he means this is a public forum and it is monitored. I do not want you raided. Please be wise. Email me. Do not post here. You have been warned. Maryland Republican State Delegate Don Dwyer. He says he is not calling for an insurrection. But then there is this. Today he renamed the militia that he's calling for. Quote, "The voluntary militia is being renamed the Constitutional Defense Force. This is for reasons that I will disclose in the next email update." Seriously, this is a duly elected sworn member of the Maryland General Assembly starting his own armed constitutional defense force, so named for reasons that he would rather not tell you in a public forum, and for which your interest expressed in a public forum might get you raided. You have been warned. You know, this kind of thing happens sometimes in our politics, in our country. And it's not just on the issue of guns. Last year, after the Supreme Court ruled that health reform was constitutional, you might remember that the former spokesman for the Republican Party of Michigan sent an email to the media and to activists on his side with this headline, quote, "Is armed rebellion now justified? America itself was possible only after its people summoned the will to risk their lives and their futures as well as those of their children for a freedom they did not enjoy but knew was their gift from God. Along with their desire to be free came their willingness to engage in armed rebellion for their freedom. God willing, this oppression will be lifted and America will be free again before the first shot is fired." Now, like the guy in Maryland, the Republican in Michigan said he was not calling for armed rebellion. But hey, he says, quote, "There are times government has to do things to get what it wants and holds a gun to your head. I'm saying at some point we have to ask the question, when do we turn that gun around and say no and resist?" Just asking the question, right? Just an ordinary guy asking a question about when we turn the guns on the government because we don't like that the Supreme Court said some new health insurance regulations were constitutional. There is a violent current that runs alongside our democratic process in this country. Today, on the 45th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King, we think of this in particular. But it's not only high-profile assassinations like that. We know this current exists. We know it is there. We know it's not a myth in our country, which is why it is unnerving when people like state legislators and state party spokesmen show a willingness to dip into that current. It is a current of non-metaphorical, actual violence where people turn to physical force and intimidation, violence and threat, and occasionally assassination to get their political way when they cannot get it through democratic means in America. In Wichita, Kansas, the violent, radical fringe of the anti-abortion movement could not stop Dr. George Tiller from offering women constitutionally protected abortion services in Kansas. They could not stop him by democratic means. And so in 1986, they bombed him. They bombed his clinic. The next day after the bombing, Dr. Tiller moved his practice to a new and secret location. He decided that he would keep going. In 1993, a woman walked up to the same Dr. Tiller while he was sitting in his car in his clinic's parking lot. She shot him in his car. She hit him in both of his arms. Dr. Tiller survived that attack as well, and he returned to work the next day. Our democratic process says women have the right to the care that he provided, and he had the courage to keep going, to keep providing it. But the other side, the side that could not get its way in the democratic constitutional process, they decided to get their way through violence instead. And in 2009, an anti-abortion activist succeeded in what his colleagues had tried before, and Dr. George Tiller was shot dead inside his church during Sunday services. And because of that, Dr. Tiller's clinic, the only one in that part of the state, closed. In the 4 years since, a woman who used to work for Dr. Tiller started a foundation and raised money to buy the old clinic building. Julie Burkhart bought it from Dr. Tiller's widow last year so she could open up a new women's clinic on the same site with a full range of medical services for women, including abortions. Since the news got out, Julie Burkhart tells the local press that she has been stalked. A flyer with her name and address has been distributed in the neighborhood where she lives. She's had protesters outside her home. Not long ago, a pastor put a sign up in her yard that read, quote, "Where is your church?" Because, of course, we all remember what happened in that other church to Dr. Tiller. The memory of violence and the threat of more violence have not faded in Wichita. There is a trial underway right now for death threats against the doctor who tried before Julie Burkhart to restart the practice. This week, an anti-abortion activist group whose phone number was found on a Post-it note on the gunman's dashboard when he was pulled over after killing George Tiller. That activist group posted the photo and name and personal information about a doctor who they believe will work at the reopened clinic in Wichita. They gleefully posted audio online of her explaining to them over the phone why it was important for that information not to be circulated there.
I had been hoping to keep my name off of the records of crazy people with guns, if you know what I mean.
With the news that the clinic is reopening this week, anti-abortion activists have not only posted that online with all the details about who that doctor is, they've also posted online tape of the man who murdered Dr. Tiller making death threats from jail now against Julie Burkhart by name. That killer recorded on the phone from his jail cell saying things like, "It's almost like putting a target on your back. It's almost like putting a target on your back to reopen that clinic." And he said, "It's a little bit death-defying, you know, for somebody to walk back in there." That current of violence running alongside our democratic process, that current of violence makes that killer see the question as one of defying death, defying the rule of the gun, which he has chosen to enforce. But honestly, what is really being defied here is violence. Violence as a means of getting your way in this country. We do not decide things in this country based on violence. You don't get your way through violence if you can't get it through the democratic process. And we have people in this country who are brave enough to say, I will make sure that we are not going to let violence win. Joining us now is Julie Burkhart. She's administrator of the brand newly opened Southwind Women's Center of Wichita, Kansas. Ms. Burkhart, as you can see, is joined here by fellow staffers at the Southwind Women's Center. It's very good to have you all here with us tonight. Julie, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having us on.
First of all, I have to ask you how it's going this week. I understand that you guys just opened yesterday. I imagine things are a little bit hectic.
Yes. We are working tirelessly here. We're very busy. We've been scheduling appointments and trying to put the finishing touches on the business. We're just very, very excited at this time.
And, you know, we have talked before, and I followed your progress as the founder and director of the Trust Women Foundation and what you have tried to do to reopen this clinic all along. And the story of everything that you do happens in the shadow of these threats against you and about the circumstances under which Dr. Tiller was killed. I just have to ask you overall how you feel like the community is responding to the opening of the clinic. I mean, is that the dominant force that you're dealing with, or are you also getting support?
We are getting support from going to the post office, to the grocery store, to the bank. People in this community are coming forward and giving us their support. Over the last few days, we've had a lot of phone calls into our office from people in the community. So overall, we have, I feel, vast community support. We just have those loud and noisy extremists that people seem to hear from the most.
Have you learned anything that might be helpful to the rest of the country in terms of how to deal with those loud and noisy extremists? I mean, obviously, I have mixed feelings about conveying what it is that they are doing and saying, because I don't want to be a megaphone for what they're doing. At the same time, I don't want to ignore the dangerousness of what it is that they're doing. Have you learned anything through this process about what you feel like is the right way to deal with people who are trying to get their way by force?
Well, I think that, our approach has been solutions to the problems, and that for every problem an obstacle that they put into our way, we take a good hard look at that, and we know that there's a solution to that problem, and we just keep, running over those hurdles. Sometimes it feels a little exhausting, but, at the end of the day, we know that if we keep, putting solutions to those problems that they try to put before us, that we will prevail.
You obviously have a special kind of courage to do this in the face of the environment that you're operating in, not just your local community, but the way that Dr. Tiller was singled out for so many years by the extremist elements in the anti-abortion movement, and, of course, the way he died. In terms of other people who are wondering about other kinds of political courage, are there things that you feel like, sort of taking this brave stand, are there things that would materially support what you're doing and make it so that more people can take brave stances in the face of threats of violence?
Well, I think that, this is a matter of principle. I'm from this part of the country. Some of my staff members who you see here, they're from this part of the country. And, this is a matter of principle, and this is a matter of what is right, and this is a matter of justice. And, all women in America deserve to have reproductive freedom, and that is what we're here to do, is to, do our small part to help to forward reproductive freedom and justice for women.
Julie Burkhart, administrator of the Southwind Women's Center of Wichita, Kansas, founder and director of the Trust Women Foundation. I want to thank you for being there tonight, particularly with all your staff there for us. And good luck in opening week. Appreciate you being here. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now that Republicans have gained total legislative control in the state of North Carolina, they are celebrating by proposing the nuttiest voter suppression scheme I have ever heard of. That's coming up next. And later on this hour, getting rid of the scariest thing in the world, one piece at a time. A true blue good news story. Stay with us.